Well, hello and welcome. Well, COVID-19 has brought us a lot of firsts. And for some, the COVID-19 era may have been the first time that many may have and are still currently experiencing anxiety. And of course, children making up a large percentage of this category, of course. Well, there's a well-known quote that says our anxiety does not come from thinking about the future, but from wanting to control it. In life, we can't stop the waves, but we can definitely learn to surf. And we can't change, what we've been through and are still going through with COVID-19. However, we really can change our perception of it and choose to look at the events and the situations from another point of view. And that being, really what have we learnt from living through this pandemic so far that can really help us to benefit our lives. And so lucky for us today, we're joined by our special guest, Sarah Smith, dietitian from Bayside Dietetics, who is going to talk to us about what we can learn from our COVID anxiety and how it can help us and our children to be healthier. And just a little bit of an intro about Sarah. She works at a private practice in Bayside, Melbourne, after working for an extensive period within a Monash Children's Hospital. Thanks for joining us, Sarah. How are you doing?
Thanks for having me, Rachel. I love your analogy about surfing these waves.
Yeah, we can't stop the waves in life, but we can definitely learn to surf. So
I like that.
Yeah. And, we just hear that sort of saying time and time again. It's just life is not going to change, but our perception of it and the way that we look at it definitely can change and just, just make it easier, I guess, to sort of to get through life.
Yeah, that's it.
But, with regards to anxiety, they say also, I guess, the greatest weapon we have against it is our ability to choose one thought over another. So with regards to anxiety, I guess, and COVID anxiety in that, what are your thoughts about this, I guess?
It's a great question because you're so right. It was the experience for a lot of us for the first time of the anxiety, or maybe it was worsened for the first time, and a lot with children. And my specialty around anxiety is the relationship to food, and I certainly know when you relate anxiety to food that you can make short-term choices that give you relief from the anxiety in the moment. They feel really good in that short term because you get that sense of relief, or you can make choices that confront the anxiety, so a little bit harder to sit through in the moment, but they more align with what you want for the longer term. So I think it becomes really relevant around food in terms of short-term versus long-term decisions.
Yeah. And look, of course, we're not discouraging, the struggles and hardships that many households are living through at the moment as well. And, there is a lot that I guess lots of households are going through, I guess, with their anxiety and all that sort of stuff. But, with this, I guess at some stage, and as you mentioned in your article, which we'll speak about in a moment, of course, putting ourselves onto a positive path really can start with something as simple as just, shifting our perception and seeing lessons in this COVID era, from a different point of view and using all of this, for good for our families and for our children. So I'd love to know what are your thoughts on this, like taking all of these lessons and actually doing something with them as opposed to just saying that was, and this is because we're still in it, let's face it, a really challenging time. What are your thoughts?
Yeah. I mean, that using our ability to change our brain to actually learn from the situation, I agree with. And hopefully with the discussion that we're talking through today, it's learning in a way that will actually help parents and people feel really quite settled and calm again around food. It's not a complex thing we're going to talk about that is really hard to do. This is just helping, reassure parents, give a bit more information and reassurance to help the job be easier really around kids feeding.
Nice. So on that, we published your article titled Learning from Our Anxiety Around COVID-19 to Help Us and Our Kids Be Healthier. So for someone who hasn't read the article yet, could you please give us an overview what it's about and just tell us what inspired you to write it?
I put my hand up at the start of the article to going and really seeking toilet paper in abundance when we had that threat of not enough toilet paper.
That madness that we lived through.
That madness that, not many are missing, but I did. I went and when we got that toilet paper that just in case toilet paper. And what I wanted to do was link that to how that can play around food so often. So COVID-19 brought out these beautiful examples that happened with toilet paper. It happened with pasta and some really random foods that we just really panicked.
Flour,
We
I think, was
weren't going to
another
get
one.
enough.
People couldn't even buy
That's
flour.
it.
Yep.
Yeah. Yep.
Crazy.
And but it was to use that information from that and our sort of a really normal human instinct that came out around doing that behavior and saying, hang on, that might play out around food at home too on an everyday basis, and it might play out for your child. So I suppose I wanted to do it with that little bit of humour and a little bit of information, because I think the best way to approach this is to be able to understand that human instinct can it can be really helpful, but it can also have some negative consequences, and being able to laugh at ourselves and learn from it can be a really helpful thing to do.
Yeah, definitely. And of course, as a dietitian, you've naturally used the analogy of food and its relation to COVID anxiety, which is a very natural thing as well. So I'd love for you to explain a little more about this philosophy, and how does the concept of not getting enough to eat do the very opposite and drive us to overeat? Could you explain a little bit about that philosophy?
Yeah, sure. It's you essentially, if you were in a very natural, relaxed, calm state, then what you would do around food, if you didn't have any sort of emotions going on, if you just had your physical self around food, what you would find yourself doing is eating when you're hungry and stopping eating when you are full. And the most natural example of that is infants who don't have anything else going on in their lives apart from just seeking contentment will be able to respond to their hunger and their fullness really appropriately. But what can happen is a whole lot of various things come in, and there's a whole lot that we talk about, Rachel, in these sessions. But the one I really wanted to bring in to talk about today was, if on top of the layer of hunger and fullness, natural instinct, if we bring in this fear that we're not actually going to get enough food, we're going to switch from using our natural cues in a really calm and relaxed way to actually going to a bit more of a stressed state around food, which is going to drive strong food seeking behavior. So all of a sudden we're going to not worry about whether we're hungry or whether we're full. We're going to go and seek food because we're worried that we're going to run out of it. So we can actually overeat. We can undereat too, but it's actually really normal to overeat in response to that and have more to eat than we need, because we're not engaged anymore with hunger and fullness. It's about trying to beat the fear of not getting enough.
Okay, so let's really deep dive into this at the moment. So is the example of panic buying and how people were stockpiling the correlation and demonstration of human and like behavior of anxiety, and how we have demonstrated this recently in the COVID-19 era? Like, for example, people were so anxious they were not going to have enough stockpiled in their cupboards and in their fridge. They went and over purchased what they needed stockpiled. So it's the same as if someone thought if they were going to run out of food, they weren't sure when their next meal is going to be, that they sort of overeat. So I guess it's a very primal defense mechanism as a like a protective measure, I guess, for surviving periods of famine when we were cavemen and cavewomen. I guess, it's like our subconscious mind. It's like our subconscious minds drive us to maybe increase like body fat storage and to gain weight, not knowing when we're going to have our next meal, almost like an insurance against the risk of like failing to find food. But I guess we're not cavemen and cavewomen these days. It's 2020 and we're just living through a global pandemic, and we're just trying to protect ourselves from catching it. So is this what you're talking about? That correlation?
Yeah, I think you've actually done a really nice analogy, because we're not cavemen still, but actually physically we haven't evolved to a huge degree from there in this respect. And what's gone much faster is that our access to food has gone from having to really seek it to now actually having an abundance of food almost all the time. And really COVID-19 was the first time that we really had that threatened again, that we weren't actually going to have enough food. So we did go back to a lot of our instinctual behavior that you are spot on. It's purely about survival. It's purely about making sure as humans we get enough to eat. And so we will do it. And probably another nice analogy of the human instinct for survival is, if you were about to dive underwater where you don't get to breathe regularly, you will suddenly take a big gasp of a breath. You won't breathe normally beforehand. You do a bit of an extra breath before you go under, in anticipation of not having enough breath when you're under. So it's a really healthy, lovely instinct that we have as humans to be able to do that. And you'll do it with water too. You'll do it with food. You'll do it with the things that you need to survive. You will be able to anticipate not having enough and be able to do a little bit of preparation to help yourself get through that patch.
Yeah. Okay. So from like an evolutionary perspective, is the ability to overeat and its relation to anxiety and COVID anxiety not so much of a psychology or like a mental state of mind, but it's more of a physical state, and it's to do like with our hyper and hypoglycemia, which is basically if our blood sugar levels are high or low, like high blood sugar levels or low blood sugar levels. What I mean by this, I'll explain my madness. But, for example, if we have like a high GI breakfast cereal, which is full of sugar, which when you take the time to read the labels, the majority of them are full of sugar. The large majority of us would then, have our blood sugar levels sort of rise quite rapidly and then drop and sort of plummet quite quickly, of course. So when they do, by lunchtime, we're starving and we end up overeating to fill our bellies again. Is this another way of looking at it, I guess, with overeating, or is it what we were saying before, just the fact that from an evolutionary perspective that we tend to overeat because we just don't know when we're going to have that next meal type of thing?
I think it would sit with more the evolutionary side of it. You make a good point that you will overeat if you let yourself get too hungry. So if you're having a really highly processed breakfast cereal and by the time you get to lunch, you're actually extremely hungry because that processed breakfast cereal has gone straight through your body and there's not much left to keep you full. And so you're extremely hungry by lunchtime. You may overeat because you've let yourself get to that extreme level of hunger. But that's probably a good example of actually engaging with hunger and responding to a physical cue and using that. Whereas the fear of not getting enough food is more about not having any awareness of that hunger level and actually overeating just purely in anticipation of not having any more in the future. So you might be hungry because you've only had a light breakfast, or you might have actually had a really wholesome breakfast and be quite full. But irrespective, if you feel like you're not going to get dinner, then you will probably go and try and have some extra for lunch just in case you get hungry at dinner.
Yeah. So making this relevant, I guess, to parenting kids, could you possibly then please explain, what our lessons are in this? And could you maybe explain how trying to stop your child from eating too much can actually backfire, and how can it actually make them eat more then?
Yeah. So with, I think first I want to say that the parents who do try and help their kids out with how much to eat come from a super caring place. So we're talking about parents that are really loving and caring for their children and just trying to help them out. But what it's important to know is that you can get this unintended negative consequence of it, which is that if you as a parent try and stop your child eating, your child can interpret that as a threat to them getting enough to eat. And they will then switch away from worrying about hunger and fullness, and they will flick to that really strong food-seeking behaviour.
Say that again.
So all of a sudden,
could you just explain that again? Sorry for my simple
yeah,
mind.
sure. No, and my lack of ability to put it into great words for you, but it's if you at a mealtime, so what I'll go through is a sort of a normal state first to your new and nice comparison. If you at a mealtime give your child food and you let your child eat to when they're full, it will be a quite natural process for them. And all the child's doing at that mealtime is worried about when they get full, and then they will stop eating. If, however, you are at every mealtime on a regular basis, you are coming in and saying to your child, right, you've had enough to eat, you should stop. And maybe, do you know what, Rachel, probably mealtime's not the best. Maybe it's a packet of biscuits. So, right, that packet of biscuits, you've had two's enough biscuits, you shouldn't have any more. So as a parent, you're coming in and trying to tell your child to stop eating something. What the child will do is going to pick up and remember that for next time. So next time that they're at the biscuit tin, they're ready to hear, you should stop eating after 2. And what they're going to do then is they're going to flick to, let me try and beat the system. Let me try and get more than these 2 biscuits. So I'm going to try and either sneak them, or I'm going to try and eat really quickly. So before I hear mum's words to say stop, I will we'll try and get access to more food. And it just comes back to that human instinct to try and beat the system of not getting enough food, and interpretation that you're not going to get enough to eat, so hence you will go and seek more food.
Okay, get it. Yeah. The more that we're telling them not to do something, as we did it as kids as well, and as all kids do, the more you say don't do something, the more they're going to go ahead and do it. Is that what it is?
Yes.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, essentially. Yep, essentially. And with food, it comes back to a really evolutionary instinct on that for sure.
Okay, so this in fact is the situation then that can be setting up a habit of children overeating. Is that right?
Exactly right. Yeah, exactly
Cool.
right.
So is there, I guess, an alternative approach that doesn't have the consequences of backfiring in this way then? I mean, there's going to be scenarios where, for example, the kids are going to be snacking and you know that you've got a nutritious meal and dinner ready for them, full of veggies, but they're sort of maybe, as you said earlier, snacking on processed foods, being biscuits and chips and that sort of stuff. And this is okay, I'm playing devil's advocate here, but you know, so all of a sudden the kids are snacking and it's an hour and a bit before dinner, and you're going to say, stop snacking on this stuff because I want you to eat your veggies at dinner. So how can that scenario then sort of stop the habit of them, I guess, overeating or not?
Yeah, great question. And I think you've used an analogy of a really common situation to have. And so I think it's a really great example to use. So the first thing that I would encourage parents to be able to do is to be able to trust their kids' natural instincts around food, their natural hunger and fullness again. And that's where, as I was alluding to at the start, a lot of peace comes from doing this approach, because you don't have to try and control your kids' quantities. You can actually sit back and trust your child has got the ability to respond to hunger and fullness just like they did when they're a baby. That instinct doesn't go away. So that's going to be there within your child still. You've just got to help them find it. And the way you help them find it is by stopping trying to do that job for them. Because the more you do the job for them, the less they're going to practice doing it for themselves, the less they're going to trust themselves, and the more they are going to look for you to try and stop them because they don't know how to do it themselves. So that's the one big underlying principle of it all. But that, to relate that to the situation that you spoke about, you sort of spoke about the child's eating in a snack time, but really the adult wants them to eat at dinner time instead.
Yep.
It's the adult's role, certainly in the household around food. A really nice role for the adult to take is to be able to decide when meals are and what the food is being offered. Right. So if the parent is thinking, hang on, I don't want my child to be snacking now because we're really close to dinner and I've got a nutritious dinner, it's the right of the parent to say, it's not snack time now. Kitchen's closed and kitchen will be, there's dinner coming. And what you're doing is essentially you're reassuring the child that there's going to be plenty of food. So your child is going to get the opportunity to eat. It's just steering the child to the meal that's got the nutrients that you want them to eat from. But then at the dinner time, when you sit down for that nutritious dinner that you described, let the child work out how much of that dinner that they need to eat according to their physical cues, and don't try and do that job for them.
Okay. So still give them, if they're hungry and dinner's not going to be for another hour and a half or so, 2 hours or something, still give them the opportunity to eat and have a snack, but give them the ability to decide how much they want, but so they understand this is a small meal because I'm going to have a big meal later. Is that what
reassurance is? That reassurance is really nice to be able to say to a child, hang on, dinner's coming, so there is plenty of food coming. But the parent can choose when the snack time is. So, for example, coming home after school and having a snack then is usually really appropriate for a kid because it's too long to wait between lunch and dinner. So the child does need to have a snack, or it might be, for kids that's not at school yet, the afternoon time. It's a really nice opportunity for a child to have a snack time then. But if you're worried that the snack time's too close to dinner, then make sure it's the right of the parent to be able to choose when the snack time is. So straight after school, get the snack done, kitchen closed from there, and then let the appetite will build up again before the dinner meal later on in the evening. And if at snack time, allow your child to have what that they need to have to fill their tummies at that time. And if you're worried that they're going to have too many biscuits, don't offer biscuits, offer something else that you're more comfortable with them helping themselves do.
So I'm hearing that communication is a very, very big thing. And this, like Rome wasn't built in a day. So it is sort of one step at a time. And then it may take some time for parents to be able to maybe, sort of, I guess the kids have the children understand this lesson. Would you think maybe? I don't know.
Yeah, I do. It is also surprisingly quick. I agree with you that it's you need that consistency of a message for a child to be able to have them accept it. However, this actually, in my experience, is a transition that you can do pretty quickly within 10 days or 2 weeks. You can get the system really sorted, which I think in the picture around food is actually quite a rapid period around time. So if you sort of make the decision as a parent to say, hang on, I'm going to take this on board. I'm going to be in charge of when meal times are, but I'm going to start to trust my child about getting enough to, use their appetite and their fullness to help them work out how much to eat rather than doing that job myself. That's actually a very, very quick, if you believe in it and you feel really solid about it, you can do it consistently and you'll find your child responds pretty quickly.
Mm-hmm. And in your article, also, you asked the question, if parents on a regular basis are asking their child to stop overeating, let's say now it's dinner time, so we've done that and we've moved to dinner time. And if parents on a regular basis are asking their child to stop eating, that they should consider observing, I guess, the signs of them starting to overeat. So the question is, should parents be observing if their children are eating too fast or if the portions are too large also? So could you maybe talk to this a little bit as well?
Yeah, sure. Those two cues, if your instinct is that your child actually is having too much and they're not actually using their fullness cues to stop them eating and they're just continuing past feeling full into having too much, where they might be feeling a little bit tired after a meal or a little bit uncomfortable in the tummy after a meal, or alternatively, if they're eating really quickly, then it probably is a sign that your child is starting to flick to food-seeking behaviour and is not using their fullness cues. And what you want to do is help them flick back. You want to get them out of that food-seeking zone and just trying to find food and back to just being able to use their fullness to guide them to stop eating.
So what's food-seeking behaviour?
So that's the anxiety. So that's the food-seeking is when you're looking for food even when you're full because you're worried that it's going to run out. So that's the analogy to coronavirus. We're looking for toilet paper even though we had enough in our cupboards because we were worried we're going to run out in the future. So if your child's in that mode where they're just looking for food even though they're not necessarily hungry for it, it's probably because they're fearing that they're not actually going to get given enough. So hence they are feeling a bit anxious about that and they're going to overeat.
And as we said at the start of the chat, this is from an evolutionary perspective. This is something that as human beings that we haven't necessarily evolved out of yet, that we're still doing this instinctively. Is that right?
Yeah, but I think it's a very helpful thing. Like if we can get back to just the pace of just being able to use hunger and fullness to guide our intake, and sure, there's a little bit more to it. You want to enjoy your food and you want to, embrace the food available. So it's not as simplistic as that. But if you use hunger and fullness as a fairly as your staple guide to working out how much food to eat, it's a really calm and peaceful thing to do. It's very natural to engage with that. And this chat's about helping parents see whether maybe they're starting to try and do that on behalf of their child, in which case they're teaching their child not to use their own hunger and fullness. They're teaching their child to listen out for their parent rather than being able to do it themselves.
Say that again, because that was gold.
So if you find yourself trying to stop your child from eating, what you're doing is you're teaching your child that they can't do it for themselves. They need you to come in and tell them when to stop food, whereas you want them to be able to go back to trusting their own instincts about how much to eat.
And so how does a parent then make that transition from one to the other?
The big thing, it's a great question. The big thing is really that you do trust your child, because if you trust your child, then they will trust themselves as well. Another thing you can do really well is role modeling, because I know I experience hearing my kids say stuff that I think is awful, but I know that I've said it 2 hours earlier, that they just are really good at role modeling whatever you do. So if you can role model trusting your own hunger and fullness, you can role model not finishing everything on the plate, You can role model having more when you are hungry. You can role model not eating everything inside and just being able to do it at a relaxed pace and being able to stop with your fullness. Then your kid will pick that up. So if you role model it yourself, if you trust your child can do it for themselves, then you'll find that your child will be able to migrate towards that for sure.
And the French do this extremely well, and this is part of their culture. One of our other partners, Marie France, from Fussy Eater Solutions, speaks about this, and I've spoken to her on a number of occasions. That the French, as a family, will go to the to the table with appetite and ensure that they are hungry, and they will eat for enjoyment, and they will eat to the point where they feel full. But they don't, once they sense that their stomachs are full, they don't, and they understand the point where they don't then keep pushing and they don't overeat. So they have the enjoyment of eating. It's not necessarily just something that they're doing just for fuel, but they enjoy the fact that they were hungry before their meal. They enjoy the meal. They know at what point that their belly is full, and they know at that point that they stop. So which is an interesting philosophy as well. What are your thoughts on that?
So that's the same thing. That is beautiful. That's a really nice example of a situation where parents are trusting their child to be able to just choose from the food that's available and use their own appetite to work out when they're full. And we do know from studies that if you take someone, say, from Australia and pop them in France and have that sort of upbringing around food, then they will adopt that same behaviour around food. So we know it's certainly learned, and it's certainly possible for anyone to get to that. And key things you said there is really that embracing appetite. So it's really awareness of it and feeling quite comfortable with being hungry, because it's just a cue that you need to eat. It's not a panic station. It's just a cue to eat. And then you go to a meal. The meal is where you eat until you feel full. And so you're responding to your internal cues around it. And you also mentioned the enjoyment of food and really celebrating that meal, so everyone could really sit there peacefully and be able to calmly access those cues around hunger and fullness.
Australia, as such a multicultural country, is really a melting pot of so many different cultures. Coming from an Italian background myself, of course, the Italian culture is that there has to be an abundance of food. And if you don't eat, and then of course our whole culture is the forcing people to eat and then overeat. It's completely opposite to what we were just saying about the French, that they know at what point their bellies are full and they've enjoyed their meal, and they're not going to have that feeling, oh, I've eaten too much type of thing as well. But as Italians, it's really ingrained in us from such a young age, eat, and so it is very much a cultural thing, I think, as well.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah.
Very, very different. But what I'm hearing, and tell me if I've heard it wrong, but if parents are putting their best efforts into putting the foods that they want their children to eat in front of them, and making those meals as enjoyable as possible, really parents should really just let the children decide how much they want to eat and when they want to stop eating.
That's a perfect summary, Rachel. Well said.
Okay, great. But what if, playing devil's advocate again, the child has only had 2 bites and they're like, I'm not hungry anymore?
That's the child's right. You as a parent, you get to accept that and just give your child an opportunity to eat again at the next meal. That's why regular meals and snacks are important, because your child's going to get regular opportunities to eat over the day. So if at one meal or snack they just choose not to eat at all, or if they choose to eat but hardly anything, that's okay, because they'll be able to eat more the next time. You're going to trust their body around choosing how much they need to eat.
Okay, great chat. We've covered a lot. So if you were, I guess, to summarize your key messages for our audience today, what would they be?
Oh, I just go back to what you said a moment ago. That was spot on. So I think for parents, that there is an approach to food that really takes the stress away for them, and that is to see your role as a parent to be about providing the food when the meal times are, and allow your child to do the job of choosing how much to eat. And if you find yourself overstepping into their zone and trying to control how much they're eating, you will find that they will find that anxiety provoking, and you might accidentally cause them to do a whole lot of overeating. So bring yourself back to doing your job and allow your child to do their job, and you'll find it really helps for nice relaxed meal times, just like the French.
Just like the French. Well, thanks for talking to us today, Sarah. If anyone's got any questions for you and or want to find out more about your practice and all that good stuff, whereabouts can they find you?
So Facebook or website, Bayside Dietetics. So www.baysidedietetics.com.au.
Right, love this chat.
Thanks for having me, Rach.
Anytime. And I'll speak again soon. Take care. Right, bye.
You too. Bye.